January 1945, the U.S. Eastern Seaboard. A hunt is underway, a hunt for U-boats. But this is no ordinary hunt, for the Americans have credible information that the U-boats approaching their shore are no ordinary German submarines. Rather, these boats are rocket U-boats, about to unleash V-1 flying bombs on New York City. The Americans will use everything at their disposal to stop this diabolical German plan from being enacted. Mounting rockets on U-boats was not a late-war idea. Rather, experiments in trying to perfect submarine launch weapons had been ongoing since as early as 1941. Peenemünde on the Baltic island of Usedom was where Germany developed its rockets and missiles in the first half of the war. Summer 1942 was the first firing of rockets off the deck of a U-boat, when a Schweres Wurfgerät 41 rocket launcher was welded to the deck of the Type 9C submarine U-511. Loaded with 6 30-centimeter rockets, the U-boat conducted successful firing tests at the surface. Then it made a series of underwater launches down to a depth of 12 meters or 40 feet. The rockets worked fine and were unimpeded by being submerged. But though such tests proved that a U-boat could launch such weapons surfaced or submerged, the weapons themselves were effectively little more than dumb mortar bombs, the U-boat having no way of controlling the rockets as they lacked a suitable guidance system. The mortar system was intended to protect the U-boat from anti-submarine hunter forces, but it was too inaccurate to be of much practical use at sea. Further development of the underwater mortar was neglected as Peenemünde worked to perfect the first of Hitler's new V for Vengeance weapons, the V-1 flying bomb. The V-1 was an early cruise missile, powered by a single pulse-jet engine. The V-1 was launched off a ramp using a steam generator. Guided by a simple autopilot that regulated altitude and airspeed, the V-1 carried a 1,000-kilogram explosive warhead. An odometer driven by a small propeller in the nose determined when the missile had reached the target area, and when the preset counter reached 0, the V-1 automatically placed itself into a steep dive to impact the target. Used to bombard London, these cheap weapons landed accurately within a circle initially 20 miles or 32 kilometers in diameter, corresponding to the entirety of London, later improved to 7 miles or 11 kilometers. 9,521 V-1s were launched at England, with about 25% hitting targets, the rest falling to flak guns, barrage balloons, fighter interception, or mechanical failure. They killed 6,184 people and injured 3 times as many, and destroyed or damaged 1 million buildings. With the V-1 perfected, the notion of mounting V-1s on U-boats was suggested in July 1943. It was an attractive idea. With a range of 148 miles, or 238 kilometers, it would provide a U-boat with a standoff capability, able to strike a target, not very accurately, from over the horizon. Because it was on a U-boat, it could be sent against any city in the world, and at the forefront of many minds was the idea of bombarding cities along the U.S. Eastern Seaboard, New York City being the most obvious target. Several V-1s in a disassembled state could be stored aboard a U-boat as reloads. To launch a V-1, a ramp and a catapult was needed, and early development work commenced on designing a system that could be emplaced onto one of Germany's existing U-boat designs. But at the same time, German scientists were already thinking much bigger than the V-1, for the new V-2 missile had been created. The world's first long-range guided ballistic missile, the V-2 cost between 5 and 10 times the cost of manufacturing a V-1, but had a much increased operational range of 200 miles or 320 kilometers. Could be launched by mobile units rather than in fixed locations vulnerable to air attack, and was impossible to detect or shoot down as it plummeted onto its target at an astounding 1,790 miles per hour or 2,880 kilometers an hour. These fearsome weapons bombarded London and southeast England between September 1944 and March 1945. Over 3,000 V2s, killing about 9,000 people, injuring tens of thousands, and causing huge damage to property. With the deteriorating war situation for Germany by late 1944, using the V2 against the United States, specifically New York City, again became a German concern. But unlike the V1, the V2 was a much bigger technical challenge. For one thing, its size alone meant that no existing U-boat was large enough to even carry one. Project Prüfstand 12 began development of a submarine cargo container that could accommodate one V2 and be towed across the ocean to the US coast by one of the new Type 21 electroboats, a revolutionary new design of U-boat, years ahead of its time. It was envisaged that a single Type 21 could tow up to 3 of these submerged V2 containers, each displacing about 500 tons. As well as a V2, each container also held a reserve of diesel fuel to supply the Type 21 during its long journey, as well as all the complicated fuels and chemicals required to launch a V2. Arriving at the firing point, ballast tanks in the container would be flooded, bringing the container to a vertical position. The guidance system would be set, and then the missile launched remotely from the mother U-boat. However, the technical difficulties in trying to adapt a V2 for launch at sea were immense. The V2's engine required a 2-component fuel, which demanded careful and long control before launching. The missile could not be transported fully fueled, as the tanks would collapse if fueled in the horizontal position. The entire process of setting up, fueling and launching a V2 on land was quite long and laborious, requiring large numbers of vehicles and technicians. However, Germany pressed ahead with constructing the first underwater containers, each 30 meters long. Orders for 3 containers were placed at a shipyard in Stettin in December 1944 and a further order at another yard at Elbing in Germany. It appears that at least one container was completed and testing started during the winter and spring of 1945, but the Germans never perfected the equipment before the war ended. But though the Germans never managed to perfect V2 armed U-boats, Allied intelligence had information that such a program was underway, and understandably, considering the Germans had been raining down V1s and V2s on London and southeast England, feared that the project was actually more advanced than it was. The information that V1 armed U-boats would be sent to attack New York City came from German spy Oskar Mantell, who was captured by the US Navy when the U-boat transporting him to Maine was sunk in September 1944. Mantell told the FBI that V1 armed submarines were being prepared for a mission. Aerial reconnaissance of U-boat bases in Norway revealed several odd mountings on U-boat decks, perhaps launching ramps for V1s. Further analysis revealed that they were actually ramps for loading torpedoes. But then, a few weeks later, other reports of V1 armed U-boats emerged, one via neutral Sweden. Although the British Admiralty believed that the Germans could launch V1s from their large Type 9 U-boats, owing to the strategic situation, would the Germans waste time and resources on such small-scale attacks on America? The US government thought so, and the Eastern Sea Frontier, a US operational command defending the US coast from Canada to Florida, was ordered in November 1944 to begin intensive anti-U-boat patrols up to 250 miles or 400 kilometers from New York City. Then more confirmation arrived that further reinforced in US minds the reality of the threat the nation faced. U-1230 successfully landed 2 German agents in Maine in December 1944. William Kolpew and Erich Gempel were subsequently captured in New York City. Like Mantell, the 2 agents reported that rocket-armed U-boats were coming. Next, on the 10th of December, New York City Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia went public with the threat, creating huge media interest in the story. 6 days later, the massive German offensive came rolling through the Ardennes forest of Belgium and Luxembourg, through weak American defenses, and an enemy who was supposed to be nearly beaten was instead beating back the Americans and advancing once again west. The U.S. Navy took the U-boat threat very seriously and prepared what came to be called Operation Teardrop, marshalling U.S. Navy hunter killer groups and U.S. AAF aircraft to destroy any U-boats that approached the American coast. The forces were ready by the 8th of January 1945. Shortly afterwards, German Armaments Minister Albert Speer made a radio broadcast in which he said New York City could expect V-1s and V-2s to fall by the 1st of February 1945, further fueling U.S. government concerns. Then, in March 1945, U.S. intelligence learned of the departure of 9 U-boats from Norway headed for the North American coast. On the 12th of April 1945, the U-boat pack received the code name Gruppe Seewolf, and their purpose was to attack shipping from New York southwards, to divert anti-submarine forces away from British coastal waters, where a fresh inshore U-boat campaign was planned. The Americans quickly concluded that Gruppe Seewolf were missile-armed U-boats, and Operation Teardrop swung into action. A huge naval force, including 2 escort carriers and 20 destroyer escorts, sorted from the Hampton Roads. 12 of the destroyers began searching in a line 120 miles or 190 kilometers long. Gruppe Seewolf found no targets as convoys had been diverted away from them. The boat's frequent radio communications with U-boat command in Germany enabled U.S. hunter forces to plot their movements with ease. First to be attacked was U-1235. Bombarded by the Hedgehog mortar aboard the destroyer escort USS Stanton on the 15th of April 1945. The German submarine escaped but was reacquired by sonar, and with USS Frost, Stanton destroyed it early on the 16th of April, all hands being lost. USS Frost then found U-880 by radar on the surface. Frost opened fire with Bofors 40mm guns, forcing U-880 to crash dive. In company with the USS Stanton, the destroyer escorts sank the U-boat with Hedgehog at 4 a.m. on the 16th of April, killing all aboard. Interestingly, both U-1235 and U-880 exploded with great force, reinforcing in American minds that the vessels had been carrying V-1 flying bombs. U-805 was caught by aircraft on the surface on the 18th and 19th of April, but not attacked. On the 20th of April, ironically Hitler's last birthday, U-805 launched torpedoes at a hunting U.S. destroyer escort but missed. The night of the 21st, U-805 escaped after 2 hours of depth charging by 3 destroyer escorts. But on the night of the 21st to 22nd of April, the USS Carter detected U-518. Hedgehogged by Carter and another destroyer escort, U-518 blew up. There were no survivors. A more southerly search by 14 destroyer escorts netted more results. Realizing the disaster that was unfolding, on the night of the 22nd to 23rd of April, U-boat command dissolved Gruppe Seewolf and ordered 3 of the remaining boats to take station between New York City and Halifax in Nova Scotia to interdict convoys. It also ordered 3 more U-boats, which had been operating independently of Gruppe Seewolf, to join the others. Allied decryption of these signals told the Americans that the V-1 armed U-boats were preparing to launch against New York City. But as the U-boats sailed to their new positions, interceptions were made. On the 23rd of April, an Avenger dropped depth charges on U-881, but the U-boat survived. Next day, U-546 maneuvered to try and torpedo the escort carrier USS Core, but was detected by the destroyer escort USS Frederick C. Davis at 8:30 a.m. U-546 immediately fired a T-5 acoustic torpedo at the U.S. ship, sinking her with a loss of 126 of her crew. U-546 was hunted relentlessly for 10 hours by 8 destroyer escorts, the damaged U-boat surfacing. Her captain and 32 of the crew were taken prisoner. These prisoners were heavily and brutally interrogated ashore, including being beaten up to force information about German plans out of them, but no information about V-1s was forthcoming, and the ill treatment continued until the end of the war in Europe. The 5th and last U-boat to be destroyed was U-881, depth charged to destruction on the 5th of May 1945. The surviving 4 U-boats surrendered at sea on the 7th of May 1945. No V-1s were discovered aboard any of the boats. The captains and certain members of the crews were all subjected to harsh interrogations. It will be recalled that the British Admiralty had believed that the Germans were capable of launching V-1 missiles off U-boats, and after the war, the US Navy actually made some practical experiments, firing the American copy of the V-1, the Ku-V-1 Loon, off the submarine USS Cusk in 1946. It was a slow process, taking about an hour to prepare and launch the rocket, but the US Navy proved that the German plan, with a few refinements, could have worked, and a few V-1s could conceivably have been launched at US cities. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also help support my channel at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box.